we get it. Navigating custody, alimony, child support, or dividing property in a Minnesota divorce isn't just stressful, it's also awfully confusing. That's why we launched the Minnesota Family Law and Divorce Answers podcast. In each short episode, we break down the most common legal questions we hear every day from clients across Minnesota and give you practical advice you can actually use. Whether you're in the middle of a divorce, just starting to think about filing, or trying to make sense of post-decree issues, this podcast is built for you. Brought to you by Jason Kohlmeyer of Kohlmeyer Hay Gun Law
Welcome
Office.
To the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack those tricky topics and hopefully give you some real clarity. And today, we're diving into something that feels, well, pretty tangled for a lot of people going through divorce, the house, and specifically that mortgage hanging over it. If you're listening, maybe you're right there now feeling, overwhelmed. We get it. So the big question we're tackling is, what actually happens with the mortgage when you separate, when everything feels so uncertain? Our mission today: simplify this financial puzzle. We'll cover practical steps for right now, the usual long-term stuff, and really dig into 3 alternative options you might not even know exist. It's about giving you choices.
Yeah, it's so important to understand this piece because, look, the house itself, that's marital property, usually gets divided, right?
Yep.
But the mortgage, that's a whole different animal. It's a contract
Right.
between you and the bank. And here's the kicker, the part that often catches people out. The divorce court. It
Yeah.
can't just rip up that contract you have with the lender. It just doesn't work that way. There's this kind of general rule. You hear it in family law.
Yep.
The debt follows the asset,
Yep.
usually.
Okay, the debt follows the asset. Let's unpack that because it sounds simple, but maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Especially when, like almost always, both names are on that mortgage note. How does that square with what the divorce papers might say? It seems like a clash.
You nailed it. That's the core problem right there. Your divorce decree, the official court order, it might say very clearly, okay, person A gets the house, person A pays the mortgage.
Yeah.
But if both your names are still on that original loan document,
Mhm.
then as far as the bank is concerned, you are both still legally responsible for the whole amount. The court assigns who should pay, yes, but it doesn't magically erase your name from the bank's contract. That original agreement, it sticks until you actively change it or pay it off. It's a really crucial difference.
Wow. Okay. That really separates the court order from the bank's reality. So
Yeah.
thinking about that, what about the immediate issue? Like right now, while the divorce is happening, bills don't stop coming.
They certainly don't. And honestly, the absolute best way, if you can possibly swing it, is to work it out directly with your spouse. Have that tough conversation. Maybe you split it 50-50 for a while. Or maybe whoever's staying in the house couples it, especially if the other person is now paying rent somewhere else.
Right, that makes sense.
Or sometimes, the person with more income might cover it temporarily. Just talking about it proactively saves so much stress and potential damage.
But what if talking isn't working? What does court usually do then?
Yeah, if you can't agree, the court often steps in. A really common temporary order is that the person who's still living in the house pays the mortgage, which, generally seems fair because the person who moved out probably has new housing costs.
Okay.
Now, in other cases, maybe where there's alimony or spousal support involved, the court might order the person who's better off financially to cover the mortgage while everything's getting sorted out. That usually needs a specific temporary court order to make it official.
That covers the immediate burden. But you mentioned a warning before, something really important people should avoid doing right now.
Yes, absolutely critical. And please, if you take one thing away for the during phase, let it be this. Do not stop paying the mortgage. Ever.
Even if the other person is supposed to pay.
Even then, don't use it as leverage. Don't do it out of spite. It might feel like you're making a point, but you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. Both of you. Missed payments hurt both your credit scores badly. And that impacts everything: renting, getting a car, qualifying for your own mortgage later. It's a hole you just don't want to dig.
That's a huge warning. That credit score is your ticket back to financial stability. Okay, so let's shift. Divorce is final. What's the typical long-term plan for the mortgage?
Right. So once the ink is dry on the divorce decree, there's usually a deadline. The court order or your settlement agreement will typically say, okay, you've got maybe 90 days, sometimes a bit longer, sometimes shorter, to either refinance the house into just one person's name or somehow get the other person's name completely off that original mortgage note.
And why is that deadline so critical? Why the push?
It's all about that debt-to-income ratio for the person who's not keeping the house. If your name stays on that mortgage, even if you don't live there and your ex is paying perfectly, it shows up on your credit report as a massive debt you're responsible for.
Ah, so it stops you from getting your own place later, or other loans. Because it looks like you already have this huge mortgage debt.
Exactly. You're effectively stuck on a mortgage to a home you don't own, financially speaking. Imagine trying to get approved for even a small condo, and the lender says, sorry, you're already tied to this other big mortgage.
Yeah, that's crippling.
It really limits your ability to move forward and start fresh. Getting off that note is key.
Okay, so the standard path is refinancing. But you hear stories. Is a straight-up refinance easy to pull off these days? Especially after a divorce.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is often no, not that easy. A traditional refinance, especially now, banks are stricter. You usually need really good credit, a low debt-to-income ratio after the divorce settlement, and often, like 20% equity built up in the house.
Which might be tough if assets were just split.
Exactly. You might not have cash for a down payment requirement or your income picture has changed. So a standard refi can be a hurdle. Now, this leads to something I kind of informally call a divorce refi. It's not an official bank term, okay?
Right.
The real terms are more like a limited refinance or sometimes a mortgage assumption. These are specific processes banks can use sometimes in divorce situations. It basically means adjusting the existing loan, maybe releasing one borrower, without starting a totally new mortgage from scratch.
Interesting. So it's like a shortcut. But you can't just walk into any bank and ask for this divorce refi.
Precisely, and this is super important. These limited refis or assumptions, they're generally only an option if your current mortgage is already with that specific bank.
Ah, okay.
You can't have your loan at Bank A and go ask Bank B for this special process. Bank B will just want to do a full new refinance with all those tough requirements we just talked about. And honestly, my experience and what I hear from lawyers is that a lot of smaller local banks, they don't really like doing these.
Why not?
Well, frankly, there's less money in it for them compared to a full refinance with all the fees. They'd rather do the bigger transaction. However, I have found consistently that one big national player, Wells Fargo, seems pretty good at handling these if your loan is already with them. They seem to have a process for it.
That's really practical, specific advice. So talk to your current lender first is the message there.
Definitely. And ask specifically about limited refinances or assumptions related to divorce.
You also mentioned something about banks maybe not even agreeing on how they handle this.
Yeah, this is where it gets kind of weird and honestly a bit frustrating. I've heard conflicting things. Some sources, like legal folks I know, say certain big national banks might actually ignore the mortgage debt on your credit report. If your divorce decree clearly assigns it to your ex and the payments are being made on time, like their system might be able to overlook it based on the decree.
Okay, that sounds helpful.
But then, I spoke directly to a regional bank, and they were adamant. They said, nope, if your name is on any mortgage, anywhere, it counts against you in our calculations, period. Doesn't matter what the divorce decree says.
Wow. So totally different approaches.
Totally different. It probably comes down to their internal rules, how they measure risk, maybe regulations. The point is, you can't assume all banks will treat your situation the same way, even with the divorce decree. You got to ask.
That's incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
It really shows you need to advocate for yourself and ask those detailed questions. Okay, so this brings us to a crucial point. What happens if the refinance path, even the limited divorce refi, just isn't going to work? Maybe there isn't enough equity. Maybe the debt to income is just too tight right now. What are the other options? The creative solutions you mentioned.
Exactly. This is where you really need to, think outside the standard box. If refinancing is off the table, you're not totally stuck. There are definitely alternative ways to handle this. Let's talk about three main ones. Option A, sell the house.
Oof. That's often the tough one emotionally, right?
It really is. I always hear, but I love this house. The kids grew up here, and I get it. There's so much tied up in it. But you have to ask yourself, is this house becoming a financial anchor? Is it dragging you both down? Is the stress and cost just too much? Sometimes making that hard decision to sell is actually the most liberating choice. We've seen people just drowning, feeling trapped by the house.
And selling provides that clean break.
A completely clean break. You sell it, you both take your share of the equity, pay off the mortgage, and you're done. You're free. You can find a new place that's right for you now without that old baggage. It's practical and often healthier in the long run.
Okay, practical, if maybe painful initially. What's the next alternative?
Option B, extend payments for the equity. So this works when one person is keeping the house, but they owe the other person money for their share of the equity. Let's say spouse A keeps the house and owes spouse B, say, $100,000 for their half of the equity. Getting that $100K lump sum might be impossible right after the divorce.
Right. Trying to refinance and pull out cash is even harder.
Exactly. So instead, you negotiate a payment plan. Maybe spouse A pays spouse B $20,000 a year for 5 years. You'd formalize this with a legal document, like a promissory note, maybe even secure it with a lien on the house so spouse B is protected.
So it's like spouse A gets an internal loan from spouse B for the equity payout.
Pretty much. It gives spouse A breathing room to stay in the house without that immediate massive payout. Now, spouse B is waiting for their money, so you might negotiate a little bit of interest on those payments to make it fair, but honestly, this can be a fantastic solution for both people. It keeps the house for one person, if that's important, and it ensures the other person gets their fair share over time in a manageable way.
That sounds really flexible. A win-win, potentially.
Yeah. Okay.
What's the third creative option?
Option C, negotiate for more time to refinance. Remember that typical 90-day deadline we talked about?
Yeah, to get the name off the loan.
Well, what if 90 days just isn't realistic? Maybe you need time to rebuild your credit score, or save up some money, or maybe you know home values in your area are rising and waiting a year will give you more equity to work with. You can actually try to negotiate a longer time frame in your divorce agreement. Instead of 90 days, maybe you ask for 1 year, or 2 years, even 3 in some cases.
So you're basically asking your ex-spouse and the court to agree to keep things as they are, mortgage-wise, for a longer period, to give you that chance to fix things.
Exactly. You're buying yourself that crucial breathing room. Now, it might be a harder sell, right? The other person usually wants off that loan ASAP.
Understandably.
But if you can show a realistic plan like, here's how I'm improving my credit, or waiting 18 months should give us enough equity, you might be able to negotiate it. It allows you time to get your financial ducks in a row so that when the new extended deadline arrives, you actually can refinance successfully. It's about being strategic.
Those three options, selling, spreading out the equity payment, or getting more time, they really open up possibilities beyond just refinance now or else. That's incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So just to recap for everyone listening, we talked about handling those immediate mortgage payments while the divorce is happening, then the standard path, which is usually refinancing within a set time, and then, crucially, these three creative alternatives if the standard path isn't working. Selling the house for a clean break, setting up extended payments for the equity owed, or negotiating for more time to make that refinance happen down the road.
Absolutely. And look, while these are strategies we see work, every situation is unique. It is so important to talk to your own lawyer. They know your specifics, the local laws. They can draft things properly and help you avoid pitfalls. And just one quick clarification on terms people mix up. The note, or mortgage, that's the loan document. Your debt agreement with the bank, the deed, that's the ownership paper. Who owns the house? Different things, even if the same names are often on both.
That's a vital distinction, the debt versus the ownership. And yes, legal advice is key. Ultimately, just knowing about these options, understanding you might have more choices than you thought, that can feel like getting some power back during a really tough time. It's about control over your financial future. So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. With this bit more clarity, what's maybe one small step you can take, even today, to feel a bit more empowered in this process? How could exploring just one of these options start to open the door to whatever your next chapter looks like?
If you found this podcast helpful, chances are you'll love the blog mancatofamilylaw.com. Also, the podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen. We cover real-world family law and divorce issues like parenting time schedules, child support changes, domestic abuse allegations and protections, and what really happens in a Minnesota divorce trial. Subscribe now and take control of your family law case, one episode at a time.